Hello there, thrill seekers! And today's Friday flashback video comes from May 23rd, 2009 in Las Cruces, New Mexico. And it's kind of neat. I found it rather randomly just going through some possible clips that I might show you, and it happens to be a clip of me talking about some of the same things that I've been talking about this week on the video channel, including this phenomenon of the teacher, the teacher from the Far East as kind of a godlike being. I talk about that a little bit, and about the shape of American Zen. And I even mention Thich Nhat Hanh in this clip. And about Thich Nhat Hanh, I hate to belabor this so much, but a lot of people in the comments who think that I'm disparaging Thich Nhat Hanh are taking to make comments that tell me about the drama and the tragedy and the sort of epic qualities of Thich Nhat Hanh's life. And I don't deny at all that there is drama and deep tragedy and an epic quality to Thich Nhat Hanh's life, and that his accomplishments are pretty amazing. So that's not even an issue for me. Again, I acknowledge that is the truth of Thich Nhat Hanh, a very tragic early life and a lot of drama and overcoming hardships and really kind of coming through the fire and all of that. This is absolutely true about Thich Nhat Hanh, and it's very impressive. That's precisely the problem, though, because we are so attracted to that drama and tragedy and epic quality and kind of comparing everything else to it. So our own lives are nothing, compared to Thich Nhat Hanh's amazing, tragic, epic, dramatic life. That's I think where we get hung up and where we can go wrong with the practice, is kind of making it all about drama, tragedy, and epicness. Maybe we need to kind of look at the more mundane qualities of our lives, and that's really what I think Zen is all about. So there you go. Anyway, there is a little bonus feature after this clip, which is the earliest video I've ever found of myself, and I just stuck it on at the end in case people might find it amusing. It's my graduation. It's right after my high school graduation, and I'm hanging out with my grandparents on my father's side and my mom and dad. So you see my mother, who's passed away, my grandfather and grandmother who are passed away, and my dad, who's still around in this little clip when I'm 18 years old. There's some film of me from earlier than this, but this is the oldest video. We didn't have a video camera. I think we borrowed one. And there's no video of the actual graduation, just us hanging out after the graduation, which I think is weird. Anyway, that's on the end of the clip as a bonus. And here we go. Take a look.
Do you have any idea what kind of form American Buddhism is going to assume?
The kind of form American Buddhism is going to assume? I don't know for sure, but it's a good question, and it's an interesting question. I don't know. One of the good things about American Buddhism that I kind of hinted at the beginning is that when you go to a Buddhist center in America, you can actually practice. And this doesn't go just for Zen, it goes for pretty much across the board. Whatever Buddhist practice you want to do, you can actually practice it. Which doesn't tend to be the case in Asia, especially in Zen. It doesn't tend to be the case at all. So I think it's good that they're practicing. And Shunryu Suzuki was the guy who founded the San Francisco Zen Center, who kind of looked at his group that was growing in the late 60s and early 70s and said, you aren't really monks, but you aren't really lay people either, you're something else. So in Japan there was a big distinction between a monk and a lay person. And yet here you had all these people who weren't necessarily taking monks' vows, who were going every day and doing zazen practice and becoming very committed and doing some of the same things that in Japan only monks did, like memorizing the Heart Sutra and all this stuff that people were doing at the San Francisco Zen Center. So I'm really hopeful that it'll assume that shape, and people actually practice it. At the same time, I also see the commercialization, which I talked about, going on, and there's a certain sort of entrepreneurship and stuff that goes on in America where people will see something as, oh boy, I can make money off of that. And there's certainly a lot of that going on. And some of that worries me. You know, I don't think there's anything necessarily wrong with making money and earning a living. Everybody's got to do that. And so, you know, when I run a retreat, it's not free. I try to make it as cheap as possible, and I try not to turn away anybody for lack of funds, but you have to pay because it costs money to run a retreat, you know. You gotta buy the toilet paper, the food, you know, all this other stuff, rent the space, there's all kinds of things going on. And that's reasonable. But what I see happening, you know, in some corners is people, you know, charging, for example, for enlightenment experiences. They'll come up with there's one guy in particular I'm thinking of, but there's a few people like this, who sort of come up with a formula that is supposed to speed you to an enlightenment experience, and you pay enough money, and you're supposed to be able to get it, which is ridiculous. It won't happen in a million years. So I think that's a bad trend. You know, and one of the things I also was seeing happening is this, which I sort of alluded to before, is this. When the first Eastern spiritual teachers started coming into America, not just Zen teachers, but all forms from India and Japan and China and all this, there was a sort of a sense that they were something else. They weren't quite human, you know? There's a story about Maharishi Mahesh Yogi, you know, when the Beatles were studying with him. He was going to take a helicopter ride, and John Lennon got, you know, wrangled his way into riding in the helicopter with the Maharishi, and he told the rest of the Beatles later that he thought Maharishi might give him the answer because they were together alone in the helicopter. You know, as if Maharishi had this great answer, you know, this secret that he could reveal in a helicopter ride in a couple of minutes. But there was this feeling that there were these godlike beings, and that's had a lot of repercussions. To the point where even somebody like me, for example, who totally categorically always denies that there's any component like that to what we're doing, I'm even getting it sometimes. And then there's a contingent who are very happy to allow their followers to believe that they are godlike beings, which I think is sad. I think some of them do it in a sort of, you know, nefarious way, but a lot of them are sort of sincere people who think that that nobody will come to do this difficult practice unless they think I'm a godlike being, so I'll let them believe that. So some of them are even well-meaning with it, but it's still damaging. So we need to get rid of that, you know. But I think American Buddhism is definitely going to be something that happens. America and Europe as well, because Buddhism came from India, moved into China, and kind of died out in India, and became an almost exclusively Chinese thing. Then moved to Japan, and subsequently died out in China when the Communist Revolution came along. It became a Japanese thing and a Korean thing and a Vietnamese as well, where it still survived outside of China. But then sort of died out in Japan in the sense that, like I said, people aren't practicing it anymore. So it comes to America and it comes to Europe, and this is the place where it's gonna happen next. And I hope that it doesn't go the same way. You know, it may end up eventually dying out and becoming very popular in America and then just fossilizing. And then maybe it'll be African Buddhism that we're talking about, or something other than that.
There seems to be a thread in American Zen that if I don't wear wooden sandals, I'm not practicing Zen. You know what I mean?
Well, there's sort of Orientalism to it.
Yes.
Yeah, and that's an interesting thing to me because I did half of my Zen practice in America and half of it in Japan. So I lived 11 years in Japan, and I became very, you can't live in a foreign culture that long without just it absorbing into your bones. I mean, unless you completely reject it the whole time you're there. So I've become very Japanese. People say this to me all the time who know me. in my mannerisms, in the way I talk, in the way I interact with people, and so forth and so on. So I'm not quite purely American anymore, but I grew up mainly in the United States, so that's where my real roots are, and that'll probably override any Japaneseness when if there's ever a conflict. But so when I came back and I learned the chants and things in Japanese, and I like them better in Japanese. It's like the Heart Sutra that I mentioned. If you chant it in English, if you chant it in Japanese, it's kanji, zaibo, satsu gyojin, nanya, hara, mite, jisho, kengon, etc., etc. If you chant it in English, it's avalokita, shvara, bodhisattva, when deeply practicing prajna, para, mite. It just sounds clunky, I think. I don't like it. So I usually do it in Japanese, but people, sometimes people who come to sit with me are like, why do we have to chant this Japanese? We should chant in English, and I'm just like, it just sounds awful, And you can read it in English and know what you're chanting. So why not just chant it in Japanese if you want to chant it? But so the Orientalism that's there even exists within my group, I guess is what I'm trying to say. And a lot of the teachers who came over who were Japanese or Chinese, Korean, Vietnamese in the case of Thich Nhat Hanh, they bring their own culture, and of course they're going to have that as part of it. And whether you can really separate the culture from the core teaching or not is a kind of a good question, because they're very intertwined at some level. And the teaching, especially in terms of Zen, is very personal. It's like me to you, and so whatever the teacher's culture is, sort of also comes across as part of the big package. And you've got to learn to interpret that in your individual way. I do it by, I see Zen elements in punk rock lyrics and things like that, and I'll bring that out. And so it doesn't necessarily need to be, but it's not that you have to. I find some people are so quick to reject anything Asian that they, it's like throwing the baby out with the bathwater. I hate cliches, but they're getting rid of useful things in the interest of getting rid of something useless. They're also getting rid of some things that are also useful. So I think it just takes time to find its way, and a little bit of the Asian stuff is okay until you find your way. There's little examples I can think of that. One example is when you do a ritualized meal, when you're in a retreat, you're supposed to be doing your zazen constantly, even during mealtime. So what they do is they serve you meals in 3 bowls that somebody, it's a rotating group of people have to go and serve everybody, and then they become, then other people become the servers, so everybody gets a chance. And then all the rest of us are sitting like this, being served in the 3 bowls, and it becomes a question of the standard accoutrements are 3 bowls and chopsticks. Well, some people can't use chopsticks, so now they can usually give you a spoon in those zen centers along with the chopsticks. But one funny thing that happened to me is the middle bowl in Japan is always miso soup. No matter what the other 2 are, the middle bowl is miso soup, which is, clear brown soup, And one day I'm at a Zen center and they serve breakfast, and here comes a bowl of brown liquid, and it was kind of dark in the Zendo, and I picked it up and I thought, well, the soup has gone kind of cold, but that happens often, because the serving takes so long. So I didn't think anything of it. I lifted it to my lips and I was like, oh my God, it's apple juice, because this was an American Zen center, so they didn't serve miso soup in the middle bowl, and breakfast time they served apple juice. So there are ways, to get around the Asianness of it. Some of those aren't quite so successful.
Oh, on this suspicious occasion, I'd like to say, suspicious occasion, that what I feel needs to be done is we need a new leader for Ohio. Now, a couple of years back, I was with a woman that I shouldn't have been, and I paid her with a check. Have you seen that?
Yeah, Springer. Accurate snail.
And
that commercial about the Springer.
What is that? You didn't.
There's
Aren't you getting in?
there's the
I
plan.
feel
Trying
we
to
need
like to.
new young
Huh?
leadership.
Brad's
for
no,
Ohio.
Brad's not the tallest. Is he?
Being
We'll
18,
zero
I
in, we'll
think
get the whole
I can
plan
provide
here.
this new young leadership that should be provided.
You won't
Or-
use checks.
I won't use checks. I will pay always in cash. Always cash.
Or credit card.
Credit card.
You know, the neat thing was that your class finished 98 in the state in math.
Isn't it amazing? Where were you, Brad?
He was the 2%.
You realize how good they
You got him
were?
up in the English side of it.